What kind of person are you becoming through your spiritual practice, and is it someone you respect and admire?
It's hard to answer without sounding hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. But I think I have benefited from my spiritual practices and pursuits I've gone through, and I'm still going through. I find myself thinking of myself as somebody who's a kind of, I mean, I've mentioned all the writing I've been doing in the last few months. It just like I'm trying to spill it all out there while I'm still healthy enough to write, but it feels like I've got something to offer. And I guess I'm not sure who might benefit from my thoughts on things, but I keep it doesn't it seems like a worthwhile thing to do and gives me a certain satisfaction.
Well, personally, I don't consider myself with admiration and respect because I don't think that really means anything for me. But one thing I have noticed is I'm emotionally and intellectually less reactive over the years. And that has been well, it keeps me out of trouble.
Less reactive, you think about personal things like family life or
Yeah.
current
Well,
events.
yeah, everything. But family life is the big one because I'm in it all the time, every day.
Mhm.
But it's not just that. It's thinning out my thinking gives me less opportunities to be reactive. I'll put it that way.
I didn't quite, but could you repeat that? I didn't
I
quite.
said thinning out my thinking.
Spinning out.
In other words, thoughts rise and fall, but I don't jump into the pool with them and wrestle. And doing that is taking some of the energy out of hyperreactivity to ongoing things like even silly things. It's so silly. I feed the pets at 5 a.m. every morning. If one pet isn't at the proper place, after I put the bowl down, my mind takes over and says, "Oh, they're not where they're supposed to be." Immediately making for frustration with the way the world is, and it's needless. But that happens much less these days. And that's just innocent things. You add in emotional things with spouse, children, or friends, or family. Never mind the politics of the era. It's really easy to get all wound up.
When you say pets, you have cats and dogs?
Yeah, 4 cats and a dog.
4 cats and a dog. That's a lot of pets.
It doesn't take that much to take care of. The dog takes the most because I have to walk the dog every few hours.
Yeah.
But feeding them is no big deal, and the cats take care of themselves pretty much.
Well, I have 7 fish, but I only have to feed them every other day and
That's my kind of pet.
keep their filter cleaned out. And they get clogged up with algae, but it's relatively easy. But
I guess I'm trying to have more of a cat mind. Cats, they don't easily get upset, and if they get upset, it goes away really quickly. Luna, how about you?
I would say, rather than thinking of it in terms of my spiritual practice making me become someone I respect and admire, I would say the way I look at it is becoming a better person morally, ethically, and spiritually is itself part of my spiritual practice. And I don't really think whether or not I respect and or admire myself really fits into it, because I wouldn't say I respect myself. I wouldn't say I admire myself. I just am. And, you know, we all have our problems. I certainly have my own whole host of issues that I have to work through spiritually, psychologically, and whatnot. But the kind of spiritual narcissism that some people are prone to is not something that I've ever been prone to. So I would just simply say I tend more along the lines of a Saint Teresa of Avila of I'm the worst of all, though that can also be its own kind of pitfall. But I just sort of play it out day by day and try to work on making these small little motions of being better to others, being better to the world. And I think it's not so much any one spiritual practice that can help with that, but it's a kind of connectedness. And if you can, through whatever practice, achieve some sort of connectedness to your surroundings, it almost forces you to interact with those surroundings in a more compassionate manner.
So what you mentioned Saint Teresa of Avila. What is she best known for? What was her?
Well, her autobiography is the second most read work of Spanish literature after Don Quixote. She also wrote The Way of Perfection and the Interior Castle, Methods of Meditation, but she has moments of great lucidity where she's writing beautiful, profound, and true things, but it's surrounded by far too much. Oh, I, the greatest of God's sinner and worthless individual, am saying this even though I shouldn't because I have no value whatsoever on the face of this earth. That kind of stuff. And in all honesty, it gets to be a bit too much. And at least in her case, it seems sincere, but there are far too many people historically in the history of religions who used self-deprecation as a means of, really kind of reverse narcissism that's even more narcissistic than actual full frontal narcissism.
Yeah. I'm the greatest sinner of them all, but I am great.
Yeah.
I'm great at it. Well, we've talked a little bit about Dr. Nasser, who was I looked to for spiritual guidance for many years, but it became obvious at some certain stage that the one quality that he seemed to lack completely was humility. And I thought that's just not, how can you look to someone for spiritual guidance who can't even, it seemed like he couldn't even fake humility. It was just, it was kind of, I guess I overlooked it or failed to notice it for many, many years and just discounted it. And then, well, yes, but at some point events happened that made it impossible to ignore. And so that's I think of a lot more recently about just if I'm tense for some reason or anxious or I don't know, nervous, just breathing, just taking a deeper than normal breath, and relaxing my shoulders. And I've never read anywhere that that's a spiritual exercise or practice, but it is. For me, just take a breath and relax your shoulders. And it brings me back, and I think other people too. It's very calming and gives you a chance to detach from whatever it is that's gotten you nervous or anxious in the first place, and to kind of step back from it. Okay.
Well, they used to say that when I was a kid. Now take a deep breath when we were upset.
Your parents told you that, right?
Yeah, and the nuns used to say that too. It was like a common thing,
Yeah,
at least in New England.
it works.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, my first teacher, David, used to say that your breath, state of your breath mirrors the state of your emotional system inside. And when you're agitated, you breathe very shallow and quickly. And if you just slow down the breathing, take deeper breaths, you can work in reverse and calm down the mental state. But yeah, I remember hearing that. But my parents would say that, and they would be hyperventilating in their upper chest the whole time. Well, the Sufis have a lot of breathing exercises, no? I mean, the sema and the chanting of the zikr, it's all, you can look at it as breath control in a certain sense.
I don't know that that's ever been overly emphasized. I mean, you invoke the divine name and you can do it very slowly or very quickly or intermediary. So you're different. So you're breathing at different rates, and that's part of the practice of invocation, is varying the pace of the invocation. But I was thinking about what Luna said, that if we could just the goal is to develop, if we don't, or increase our state of our character. And I haven't really thought a whole lot about the definition of character, but if I think about it much, maybe I'll write another 3-page essay or something on it. But that covers a lot of positive qualities, and if you have good character, you're a good person, I guess.
Well, it's also about knowing your limits and knowing where you are on the path and where you have to improve. For instance, Kierkegaard wrote a number of pseudonymous works, but also published some under his own name. But near the end of his life, there were a couple of works that he was planning to publish under his own name that really did show his perspective, but he felt they were coming from such an ideal perspective that he himself, though he wrote the works, felt almost like it would be a lie to say that they came from him, because he himself doesn't yet practically embody that ideal. So they also were written under pseudonyms. And it's a matter of saying, here's where I am, here's the ideal, I'm striving towards that ideal. I'm not there yet, but the path ultimately is infinite. The divine is the only ideal, and we can infinitely approach the ideality of the divine without actually becoming fully the ideal.
But I guess we're aiming to get as close as we can to the ideal. That's the direction. You want to go on to the next one?
Sure, why not? In your encounters with others, especially those who are difficult or different, how do you stay faithful to the core of your spiritual path?
Could you give maybe an example of interacting with somebody who's difficult?
I'll just say this, that every interaction is difficult because the ego tends to be self-contained, and it wants to basically suck all of the air out of the entire world, and it would if you let it. In fact, I would say that a kind of right-headed approach to spirituality could be extremely beneficial for the environmental movement. Because if you see that everything's connected, and if you see that everything is one, then it all of a sudden, to a certain extent, becomes harder to desecrate that which ultimately also is yourself. But when you encounter others, it's by nature, you tend to be drawn to that which is similar to you and be repulsed from that which is different. But you have to understand that it's all part of this same essential cosmic fabric. And, rather than using an example of a person, well, a tree is very different. And sometimes the tree can be difficult because humans and trees sometimes have a hard time communicating. But the goal there is to have understanding in it, to have faith in it. And if that difficult or different encounter is, let's say, a human, you can respond to anger with anger, you can respond to hate with hate, but then you end up being tarnished by those negative emotions. It's better to shine a light in the darkness. And very often, though not always, but very often, if someone is dark and despondent and full of anger and pain and hatred, if you shine just even a little bit of light on them, it can make them drawn towards that light.
So what comes to mind when you say different? Marcia and I searched through programs to watch for entertainment. We may spend an hour at night or something, or an hour and a half, usually on British TV, but we found one recently, and I think it's fairly new. It's called Patience, and it's the name of a woman, a young woman, who is autistic, and she goes to work in a police station in York, England, I guess. As I guess you'd say, a librarian. She's in charge of the police file, the records, the records of prior cases, and they show her in this huge hall with. Anyway, she knows that if somebody says, "Could you pull a file on this case that occurred 20 years ago?" she'll go get it. But they show that, and I think we've just watched the first two, but there was one detective who manages to sort of connect with her and realize that she has some very useful insights that are helpful in terms of solving cases. So it's basically, she participates, and she gets sort of, everyone else in the police station said, "Oh, forget her. The detective, there's a woman, the detective says, "Well, could we have lunch together?" And she says, "Sure." So the detective goes into their cafeteria, gets a platter and puts her food on it and goes to a table. And then Patience comes in and gets her food and walks to a different table, because that's always the table, and so the woman detective goes and joins her. "May I join you?" "Oh, yes, of course." She said, "This is the best table in the room because of whatever, and it's the only one I've used." But I think it's an example. And they have this discussion. The woman who's autistic, they call it, what do you call it, neurodivergent was the term, and she said something like the neural normal people do this. She has a little support group that she goes to of adult autistic people, and but it's an example of instead of turning away or ignoring or discounting people because they are different, you miss opportunities to benefit from the talents they have, but also you can create this show. This woman detective is basically gives her a job as her assistant, and much to the chagrin of other police officers in that office. But it seems like a very nice thing to do, to try to include people, even though they are different in some way.
Temple Grandin had an interesting way to describe this. I saw an interview with her. She said, imagine we're back in caveman days. There's a bunch of guys around the campfire. Everybody's slapping butts and going off and mating. And who do you think is going to invent the idea of making fire by rubbing two sticks together? Those guys who are like the jocks, or the neuroatypical person in the back of the cave rubbing two sticks together that they're ignoring?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a very good way of putting it. Did you ever see the movie The Accountant, Daryl?
Is that the accountant who was the assassin? Was that?
Yes, Ben Affleck is the only good dramatic role I think I've seen him play.
I think I saw it years ago. Is there a new version out now?
Oh, there is a version 2 that just came out this year, but I think the version 1 was the best.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very good example of what somebody could do if they're on the less severe end of the Asperger's spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
That with the proper direction from parents and educators when they're young, they can do things that are useful.
Yeah, I don't remember. So the accountant had Asperger's syndrome.
Yes, and he was a forensic accountant, but he could go through like 15 years. He'd do a 15-year audit overnight.
I see. Very fast. Well, there was a movie called The Rainmaker,
Yes, that was a good one.
He had extraordinary talents, even though he was neurodivergent, I guess. Difficult people are. I mean, there are some people that it seems to be more difficult to just get along with. They're sometimes rude and aggressive and arrogant and overbearing and highly opinionated. I have two close friends from my hometown that we met when we were 15, or two of them met when they were 13, I think, and I met them when they were 15. We were 15. And there's one of the men still lives in this area, lives in Alexandria, but he married a woman who was so highly opinionated, particularly on politics, that if somebody's even hints that they might find something worthy in Trump, I mean, she won't deal with them at all. I mean, they're absolutely off the face of the earth as far. And unfortunately, our third friend but probably did vote for Trump, but he's not extreme MAGA, I would say, and it's hard to keep in touch with him lately. But one of the problems is that my friend Jim's wife, who's so opinionated and so staunchly liberal, she won't let Jim. She just forbids her husband from interacting with the old friend. And it's a painful situation. But she's difficult. I mean, I can get along with her because I don't, differ politically, but there have been times when she's gotten mad at my wife and we don't see each other for 10 years.
Wow.
And then we get back together somehow, and then something else happens 5 years later anyway. So what was the question about dealing with difficult people?
How do you stay faithful to the core of your spiritual path. So if someone comes along and is just miserable to deal with, maybe you have to deal with them for whatever reason, and they're just really making you want to smash a dinner plate over their head. How do you prevent yourself from smashing that plate over their head?
Take a deep breath, I guess.
You see, it's easy for me because my spiritual path encourages smashing plates over people's heads.
That's part of the practice, huh?
That's part of the practice.
If somebody's out of line, they need to be treated accordingly. You know?
Well, I would say there's, a lot of anger is toxic anger, and it definitely is negative, but I do think that there is a place for sacred rage, and sometimes that can be very liberating. And I do definitely, even though there's probably better ways of dealing with things, I do definitely feel that getting things off one's chest and maybe exploding in an outburst of sacred rage is better than holding it in. Holding it in and letting things get bottled up inside and approaching the world passive aggressively really is about the worst thing that you can do. My attitude towards these things is to try to be a better person, and certainly I'm calmer now than I was many years ago. But if I have to, let something out, I'm going to let it out and be done with it. So I've had cases where, maybe there's an argument, I let it out, the rage flows fully for a few minutes, and then things are good. But then too many times people interact with each other and they're trying to be polite, they're trying to be nice, but they're just bottling up everything inside, and it creates this kind of hatred and animosity over years and even decades. And that, I think, is terrible.
I think I'm generally perceived as sort of a quiet, soft-spoken person, but there have been a few occasions. I think of one in particular. When I was living in Austin, there was a time I was in private practice and wasn't making enough to survive on. I was living with my wife, and I and our two daughters moved in with our Marsha's mother, and her father was an architect, but he had 7 or 8 architects. It was a fairly medium-sized firm. But at some point they had a recession, and this is back in the early 70s, and the architecture business gets hit first in a recession. People just say, we can't be thinking about building buildings now. We're going into a recession. And so I was doing a lot of legal work for him, and it became obvious to me that he needed to declare bankruptcy. And so I actually started taking courses, reading up, and even got a few. Went to the federal court and said, I'd like to do some of these bankruptcy cases if somebody's needing. Anyway, so I had some experience, and it was at one point he moved from Austin to Houston, and then he would come back, and he was back in the house, and I just kept trying to persuade him that you really do. I've got these papers prepared. You really do need to file bankruptcy to stop these creditors harassing all the time. And I remember at one point just exploding, and just when I do speak up, I have a very, very loud voice. I mean, it's one of the very few times, but I think it helped. I mean, he didn't immediately. He was just humiliated by the thought of declaring bankruptcy. But what really tipped it for him, and this is a slightly different point is he was living in Houston and he had borrowed some money from one of these small savings and loan companies that was, might say, on the edge of propriety or something. And so one day he had three big guys come to his apartment and said, "You're going to have to pay this money back or else." And so at that point, he told me about it, and I said, "If we file bankruptcy, I can get an injunction against the savings and loan from making any collection efforts, and the federal court judge will enforce that." And so that's what we did. That was what triggered his decision. But and there have been maybe 2 or 3 other occasions in my long life that I've gotten so mad or whatever that I've really yelled at people, but it's very, very rare. But I think I agree with you. There are times when it's appropriate and it clears the air to do it. I remember when I was getting to know Terry, this was maybe the late 90s. He and I had some telephone calls in which we got quite angry at each other. I don't think I ever yelled at him, but I remember having some difficult conversations. Fortunately, we haven't had those in years now, but it can be difficult on occasions.
I've been told I can be difficult, but I think it's just the whole world that's difficult.
Just being alive in the human state is difficult at times.
Being alive in the human state is difficult by design. You know, there was some guru one time who just said, what it comes down to is this: just don't be a jerk.
The guru said that.
Yeah, the guru said that. Just don't be a jerk. Fundamentally, in your interactions with others, just don't be a jerk. I mean, we tend to go through life thinking of ourselves, and if we just stopped thinking of ourselves for a little bit and just put ourselves in the other person's shoes and just tried to respect their autonomy as, a living, breathing, sacred being, it would go a hell of a long way towards, creating more peace in the world. Maybe not necessarily intergovernmental peace between the nations, but peace between individuals.
Mm-hmm. So, David, you want to wrap us up on that question tonight, or should?
Well, I can certainly identify with you, Daryl. What was really difficult for me is I was a very academic and clinical research-oriented physician, and I was very opinionated on the things that I really knew something about. And I'd see people in my life suffering and just not doing anything about it, and I would get very angry. But not very often would I unleash on them, once or twice maybe. I'd say something like, if you want to keep complaining, go do something about it, and then I'll listen. Which made me feel a little bad afterwards. But bottom line is, I figure everybody's got their free will to do what they want to do. And other than mentioning something, it's not my job to try to coerce them into doing things the way I think they should be done.
That's one fundamental difference, I think, between how doctors are expected to act in America versus certain other places. Like, it's really quite culturally appropriate in Italy for a doctor just tell you, don't bother coming back until you actually stop eating too much crap and start exercising and lose some weight. It would be considered insensitive in the US, but, sometimes I think that kind of tough love might actually be the best course of action.
Yes. Here you'd be sued for that.
Yeah, I don't think my doctor has ever said, "Why don't you lose 30 pounds?" I mean, it's like that's against the rules or something. I mean, it's such an obvious thing to say, but doctors don't say it here in this culture, but they do in others. So.